The sound that shattered Richard Sterling's world wasn't an explosion. It was the sharp, definitive crack of a mahogany gavel against a sound block. In that single moment, in a ballroom dripping with crystal and old money, his carefully constructed universe imploded. He had just publicly bid $500,000 for a dance with his beautiful young mistress, a final, arrogant declaration of his new life. But the winning bid wasn't his. From across the room, a voice, calm and clear as a winter morning, had offered 10 times that. The voice belonged to the one person he had forgotten to factor into his grand equation, his wife. The Sterling penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't a home. It was a museum of a successful life. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a city Richard Sterling felt he had conquered. Every surface was cool marble or polished glass. Every piece of art was an investment, and every room was filled with an expensive, echoing silence. This was the kingdom Richard had built, and Usher Sterling was its ghost queen. For 22 years, Usher had been the silent partner in the Richard Sterling enterprise. When he was just a brilliant but chaotic coder with a world-changing idea, she was the one who organized his vision, wrote the business plan, and charmed the first angel investors with her quiet confidence and razor-sharp intellect. She had managed their finances with a forensic accountant's precision, turning his impulsive genius into a stable, sprawling empire, Sterling Innovations. While Richard graced the covers of Forbes and Wired, Usher managed the vast, intricate machinery behind the curtain. She was the architect. He was the facade. But over the past year, the facade had begun to crack. It started subtly. The late nights at the office became more frequent, explained away by a critical new product launch. The hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, his back turned to her, were dismissed as sensitive board matters. Then came the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his cashmere scarves, a cloying, sweet gardenia that was too young, too eager. His distraction became an obsession. His phone, a black monolith of secrets, was never out of his sight. He smiled at its screen with a warmth he hadn't shown her in years. Usher never confronted him. The confrontation was messy, emotional, and beneath her. She was a strategist. You don't scream at a chess opponent. You watch their moves, anticipate their strategy, and slowly, silently, arrange the pieces for a checkmate they never see coming. The catalyst's name was Issy Vance. Richard had introduced her at a company gala 3 months prior as his new personal protégé for the company's philanthropic arm. She was 26, with eyes the color of whiskey and a laugh that seemed to fill any room. She looked at Richard not as a man of 54, but as a titan, and he bathed in her adoration. He paraded her through his social circles, the brilliant mentor and his dazzling discovery. To everyone else, it looked like a magnanimous gesture from a CEO. To Usher, it was the clumsy, arrogant flaunting of an affair. Usher watched them from across rooms, filled with champagne and superficial conversation. She saw the way his hand lingered on the small of Issy's back, the proprietary gleam in his eyes, the way Issy would tilt her head, a practiced gesture of vulnerability and fascination. She saw it all, and she began to prepare. The announcement of the annual Starlight Gala for the Children's Oncology Network was the final piece. It was the premier philanthropic event of the New York social season, a place where fortunes were publicly pledged and reputations were cemented. This year, Richard, a major donor, had engineered a special role for his protégé. Issy Vance was to be the guest of honor, a title usually reserved for esteemed surgeons or lifelong patrons. She would be the centerpiece of the evening. One crisp Tuesday afternoon, a week before the gala, a courier delivered a velvet box from the jeweller, Van Cleef and Arpels. It wasn't for Asha. She found the receipt carelessly discarded in Richard's study bin. It was for the Alhambra necklace, a cascade of mother-of-pearl clovers set in gold. The delivery address wasn't their penthouse, but an apartment in a newly developed Tribeca high-rise she'd never heard of. The buyer on the receipt was Sterling Innovations, logged as a corporate gift. Asha felt a cold, clarifying calm settle over her. This wasn't just an affair. It was an embezzlement of their life, their shared history, their company. He was using the empire she helped build to finance his betrayal. That evening, Richard came home, buzzing with an energy she hadn't seen since their company's IPO. "Ella, darling," he said, barely looking at her as he loosened his tie. "About the gala on Saturday. I've arranged for Issy to be honored. It's a fantastic move for the company's image. She's going to be the face of our new charitable foundation." Asha simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "How wonderful for her," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "She must be thrilled." "Thrilled is an understatement," Richard pretended. "She's a star. It's time the world saw it." He paused, finally looking at her, a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or just annoyance, in his eyes. "You'll be there, of course. We need to present a united front." "Of course, Richard," Asha replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." He didn't notice the double meaning. He didn't notice the icy resolve in her eyes. He saw only what he wanted to see, the quiet, supportive wife who had always been his backdrop. He had long forgotten that the backdrop was, in fact, the foundation holding everything up, and foundations, when they choose to, can move. Asha's war room was not a place of maps and pins, but of screens and numbers. It was the home office Richard had mockingly called her, Little Hobby Corner, the place where she played with spreadsheets. He had no idea that from this quiet, minimalist room, she could command the entire financial nervous system of their shared world. As a co-founder and a primary signatory on all major corporate and personal accounts, she had unrestricted access. It was a privilege Richard had granted her years ago, long before he saw her as a fixture rather than a partner, a detail he had long since forgotten. The day after finding the jewelry receipt, Asha began her audit. It wasn't an act of suspicion anymore, it was an act of discovery, of gathering munitions. She bypassed the glossy, sanitized reports their CFO prepared for board meetings and delved directly into the raw server data. Transaction logs, expense accounts, wire transfers. It was a digital archaeological dig into the heart of his betrayal. She found the Tribeca apartment first, leased for $30,000 a month through a shell corporation, IV Enterprises, which was laughably transparent. Easy Vance. The funds were being funneled from a Sterling Innovations marketing and development slush fund that Richard controlled exclusively. He was using shareholder money to house his mistress. That was not just immoral, it was illegal. Asha downloaded the lease agreement, the wire confirmations, and the shell company's incorporation documents. Exhibit A. Next, she followed the trail of his corporate American Express Centurion card, the exclusive black card he was so proud of. It painted a vivid, vulgar picture. A week-long trip to St. Bart's in August, charged to off-site executive strategy sessions, complete with couples massages at the Eden Rock Hotel and receipts from a high-end lingerie boutique. A weekend in Aspen in October, filed as Investor Relations, featuring private ski instructors and a $15,000 bottle of Domaine de la Romanée Conti wine at the Little Nell. Issy's Instagram account, which she had foolishly kept public, corroborated every detail with sun-drenched photos and snowy selfies, carefully cropped to show only herself, but the reflection in her sunglasses or a champagne flute told the full story. Asha screenshotted everything. Exhibit B. The spending was breathtaking in its arrogance. Designer wardrobes from Chanel and Dior, a personal driver, memberships to exclusive clubs, all coded under vague corporate expenses like client entertainment or brand ambassador outfitting. He wasn't just cheating, he was rebranding his mistress on the company dime. He was liquidating their joint future to build one with her. For 2 days, Asha barely slept. Fueled by cold fury and black coffee, she compiled a dossier so damning, so meticulously documented, that it could not only obliterate Richard in a divorce court, but could potentially trigger an SEC investigation and a shareholder lawsuit that would dismantle his public persona, brick by brick. She contacted her lawyer, a woman named Maria Albright, known in New York legal circles as the Shark for her bloodless efficiency. In a sterile conference room overlooking the East River, Asha laid out the printed files. Maria, a sharp woman with severe grey hair and an even more severe expression, reviewed the documents in silence. She didn't offer sympathy or condolences. She offered strategy. "He's a fool," Maria stated, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the wire transfer record for the apartment. "This is a clean kill, Asha. We can file on Monday, freeze his assets, and have him out of the company by Christmas. The infidelity clause in your post-nup is strong. But this is corporate malfeasance. It renders the entire agreement moot. You're not entitled to half. You're entitled to damages." Asha listened, her hands folded calmly on the table. "I don't want to file on Monday, Maria." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You want to wait? Give him a chance to hide assets?" "He doesn't know I know," Asha said. "He thinks I'm oblivious. He thinks I'm decorative. I want him to continue thinking that right up until the last possible moment." She leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a fire Maria had never seen before. "The Starlight Gala is on Saturday. He has orchestrated a grand public debut for his mistress. He intends to sideline me, to humiliate me with politeness and pitying looks from our friends. He wants to present her as the future." A slow smile spread across Maria Albright's face. She understood immediately. This wasn't just about the money or the divorce. This was about the narrative. You don't want to just win in court, Asha. You want to win in the court of public opinion. "I want to win everywhere," Asha corrected her. "I want to take the stage he has built for her, and I want to burn it to the ground. There's a charity auction that night. The main event is a first dance with the guest of honor, Isi." Maria's smile widened. "And you want to buy it?" "I want to make a statement he can never recover from," Asha said. "I need you to do 2 things for me. First, prepare the divorce papers. Have a process server ready to go on Saturday night. He is to be served at the gala immediately after the auction. Second, I need you to arrange a credit line, a very large one. I want it secured against my personal stock holdings in Sterling Innovations, the shares I held before we were even married." Maria Albright leaned back, a look of profound respect in her eyes. Most clients came to her broken, seeking revenge. Asha Sterling was coming to her with a battle plan. She wasn't a victim. She was a tactician. "Consider it done," Maria said. "What's your budget for this dance, Asha?" Asha looked out the window at the city skyline, the towers of glass and steel that she had helped her husband conquer. "There is no budget," she replied softly. "I'm buying back my life. It's priceless." The day of the Starlight Gala dawned grey and cold, a perfect reflection of the ice that had formed in Asha's veins. While Richard slept in, recovering from a late, bored dinner that she knew had been with Issy, Asha was already awake, executing the final stages of her plan. Her first call was to Clara, her assistant of 15 years. Clara was more than an employee. She was a quiet, fiercely loyal confidant who had watched Richard's slow drift into arrogance with worried eyes. "Clara, good morning," Asha said, her voice crisp. "I need you to enact the Phoenix Protocol. Please begin immediately." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The Phoenix Protocol was a contingency plan they had created years ago, a theoretical failsafe designed to protect Asha's personal assets and intellectual property claims in the event of a hostile takeover or Richard's sudden death. It involved a complex series of digital handshakes, transferring specific, pre-designated assets into a private trust under Orsha's sole control. It was a corporate ghost protocol, untraceable from the outside. Activating it now was a declaration of war. "Asha, are you sure?" Clara whispered, the gravity of the command clear in her voice. "I am," Asha confirmed. "And Clara, thank you." With the financial preparations in motion, Asha turned her attention to her armor. For the past decade, her gala attire had been chosen for her by a stylist Richard had hired, always elegant, understated, and safe. She was meant to be a tasteful accessory. Tonight, she would be anything but. She dismissed the stylist with a polite but firm text message and walked into her cavernous closet. Pushing past the rows of beige, navy, and black gowns, she went to the very back, to a section she hadn't touched in years. There, preserved in a garment bag, was a dress she had bought on a whim in Milan shortly after their IPO, a moment when she had felt powerful and fearless. It was a creation by Schiaparelli, a couturier known for its audacious and artistic designs. The gown was a column of the deepest, richest crimson silk that seemed to drink the light. It was sleeveless, with a severe, architectural neckline that framed the collarbones and a daringly low back. But its centerpiece was the embroidery, a magnificent golden phoenix, its wings intricately stitched with gold thread and studded with tiny rubies, wrapped itself around the bodice, its tail feathers cascading down one side of the dress in a fiery waterfall. It was a dress that did not ask for attention. It commanded it. It was not the dress of a quiet, supportive wife. It was the armor of a queen. When Richard finally emerged from their bedroom suite late that afternoon, he found Asha in the main living area, staring out at the city. She was already dressed, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon, a pair of teardrop diamond earrings her only jewelry besides her wedding ring. He stopped dead in his tracks. He had never seen her in red, let alone a red so bold, so alive. The dress transformed her, sculpting her figure and lending a formidable aura to her usually quiet presence. For a fleeting second, he saw the woman he had first fallen in love with, the brilliant, ambitious strategist who had been his equal in every way. The moment passed, replaced by irritation. "That's quite a dress, Ella," he said, his tone laced with disapproval. "A bit loud for a charity event, don't you think?" "I felt like a change," she replied evenly, turning to face him. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. He felt a prickle of unease. There was something different about her today, a stillness, a self-possession that was almost unnerving. He dismissed it as pre-gala jitters. "Well, try not to upstage the guest of honor," he said, with a condescending chuckle, gesturing vaguely towards her dress. "Issy is the star tonight." "Let's remember that." He walked away to get ready, oblivious to the fact that Asha's choice of a phoenix was no accident. The mythical bird that rises, reborn and more powerful, from the ashes of its own destruction. Later, as they rode down in the private elevator, The silence between them was thick and heavy. Richard was scrolling through his phone, a smug smile playing on his lips, likely texting Issy. Asha watched his reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. He looked like a man who thought he had won the game. He had no idea that she had already changed the board, rewritten the rules, and was about to flip the table over entirely. The doorman held the door of the waiting town car. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling," Richard grunted in response, still focused on his phone. Asha met the doorman's eyes and gave him a warm, genuine smile. "Good evening, Michael. Have a good night." It was a small gesture, but a significant one. Richard had stopped seeing the people around him years ago. Asha saw everyone, and tonight, everyone would see her. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and calculated smiles. The air hummed with the low thrum of power, the conversations of hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and old money matriarchs. It was a jungle where status was the currency and reputation was everything. Tonight, Richard Sterling intended to make a major acquisition in both. He made his entrance with Asha on his arm, a necessary prop for the cameras at the door. He smiled broadly, the benevolent billionaire, while Asha offered a polite, serene smile of her own. The photographer's flashes went off like a volley of gunfire. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, looking wonderful," they shouted. Richard squeezed her arm in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate, but was, in reality, a command. "Play your part." Once inside, he dropped her arm as if it were hot. "I need to go and check on Issy, make sure she's comfortable," he said, already scanning the crowd for his real guest of honor. "Mingle, Ella. Try to look happy." He disappeared into the throng before she could reply. Asha stood alone for a moment, a crimson pillar of calm in the swirling chaos. She saw the looks, the pitying glances from women who knew, the curious stares from those who suspected. She had been the subject of their whispers for months. Poor Asha. He's making such a fool of her. Tonight, she would give them a new story to whisper. She made her way not to the clusters of society wives, but to the bar, where she ordered a glass of mineral water with a lime. As she stood there, a formidable figure approached. It was Harrison Blackwood, the elderly, deeply respected chairman of the board of Sterling Innovations. He had been one of their first investors, a man who valued stability and integrity above all else. "Asha," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "that is a magnificent dress. I haven't seen you look so formidable in years." "Thank you, Harrison," she replied. "Sometimes one must dress for the occasion." "Indeed," he said, his shrewd eyes assessing her. He then glanced across the room, where Richard was now fawning over Issy, who was holding court in a shimmering silver dress, the Van Cleef and Arpels necklace, a brilliant beacon on her chest. Richard had his hand firmly on her lower back. It was a shockingly public display. Harrison Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Richard's behavior is becoming a liability," he said, his voice low. "The board is concerned. This public flaunting of his protégé is unseemly and unprofessional. It reflects poorly on the company." "I understand your concerns, Harrison," Asha said, taking a slow sip of her water. "And I assure you, they are being addressed." Her cryptic confidence seemed to both intrigue and reassure him. Before he could press her further, the lights dimmed, and the evening's host, a famous news anchor, took the stage. The dinner service began, and the charity auction was announced. Asha sat at the Sterling Innovations corporate table, a seat of honor that felt like a cage. Richard had placed her at the far end, while he and Issy sat in the center, laughing and whispering like a newly engaged couple. The humiliation was deliberate, a public demotion from wife to distant relative. The auction started with the usual items: A week on a private yacht in the Caribbean, a Patek Philippe watch, a walk-on role in a blockbuster movie. The bidding was brisk, a performance of philanthropy by men and women for whom $100,000 was a rounding error. Richard made a great show of winning the watch for $80,000, presenting it to the company's CFO with a magnanimous flourish. He was warming up the crowd, establishing himself as the evening's big spender. Asha watched, impassive. She didn't touch her food. She didn't touch her wine. She sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, an island of stillness. Her assistant, Clara, seated at a nearby table, caught her eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The Phoenix Protocol was complete. The assets were secure. Finally, the auctioneer, a charismatic man named Simon, stepped forward for the final, premier item of the night. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Simon boomed, his voice resonating through the ballroom, "for our grand finale, an item of unique and priceless value, a chance to create a magical memory with our stunning guest of honor. We are offering one unforgettable evening, beginning with the first dance of the night, with the incredible enchanting Miss Issy Vance." A spotlight hit Issy, who blushed and smiled, placing a hand on her heart. The room erupted in applause. Richard beamed, looking like the proudest man on earth. He had bought her the necklace, the dress, the title. Now he would buy her the dance, cementing her status in front of the world. It was his coronation for his new queen. Asha watched him, her expression unchanging. She saw his arrogance, his certainty. He believed he was the master of this universe, that his wealth gave him the power to rewrite his life, to discard a 22-year marriage like an outdated piece of software. The air crackled with anticipation. The humiliation was complete. The stage was set. Now it was her turn. "Let's open the bidding for this magical evening with Miss Vance," Simon the auctioneer announced, his smile wide. "Who will start us off at the generous sum of $25,000. Before anyone else could even raise a paddle, Richard Sterling's voice cut through the air, confident and proprietary. $100,000. A collective gasp, followed by appreciative murmurs, rippled through the ballroom. It was an audacious opening bid, a clear power play designed to intimidate any potential rivals. It was Richard declaring to the room, "She is mine. This is my show." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk on his face, and gave Issy's hand a squeeze. She looked at him with wide, adoring eyes. A rival tech billionaire, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had a long-standing feud with Richard, raised his paddle with a grin. 125,000. Richard didn't even flinch. 200,000. His voice was flat, bored, as if swatting away a fly. The room was buzzing now. This was no longer just a charity bid. It was a duel between titans. The dance with Issy was merely the pretext. This was about ego. Marcus Thorne hesitated, then raised his paddle again. 225. 300,000. Richard shot back instantly, his voice louder now, laced with irritation. He glared across the room at Thorne, a look that said, "Do not test me." Thorne, enjoying the spectacle, conferred with his wife, who shook her head. He theatrically lowered his paddle. The room belonged to Richard once more. Simon, the auctioneer, let the tension hang in the air. $300,000 from Mr. Richard Sterling. A magnificent bid for a magnificent cause. Do I hear 325? 300,000 going at once. Richard's smirk returned. He had won. He had publicly marked his territory. He looked over at Asha at the end of the table, a flicker of malicious triumph in his eyes. He expected to see her looking small, defeated, humiliated. But Asha was not looking at him. She was looking at the auctioneer, her expression one of serene concentration. "Going twice," Simon continued, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. Issy was practically vibrating with excitement. This was her moment. In a room full of the most powerful people in New York, Richard Sterling had just spent nearly $350,000 to claim her, to dance with her, to anoint her. Richard put his arm around her chair, ready to stand and accept the applause. This was the perfect climax to his plan. And sold for 300, it was at that precise moment that Asha acted. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her paddle frantically. She simply lifted her paddle, number 237, into the air with a quiet, deliberate grace. Her voice, perfectly amplified by the ballroom's acoustics, cut through the auctioneer's pattern. It was calm, clear, and carried the chilling weight of absolute authority. $500,000. If a bomb had gone off, the effect could not have been more dramatic. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, tomb-like silence. Every single head swiveled to stare at the woman in the crimson phoenix dress sitting at the end of the Sterling Innovations table. Richard's face, which had been a mask of smug victory, froze. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pallid, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He stared at his wife as if he had never seen her before. Was this a joke? A pathetic, desperate cry for attention? Issy's smile faltered, her expression twisting into one of confusion. She looked from Asha to Richard, her whiskey-coloured eyes wide with uncertainty. Simon, the auctioneer, was a professional. After a split second of shock, he recovered. A gleam appeared in his eye. This was the kind of drama that made legends. I have a bid of $500,000, he announced, his voice filled with renewed energy. A staggering bid from Mrs. Asha Sterling. The silence broke, erupting into a furious, sibilant wave of whispers that swept through the room. Did she just bid against him? For his mistress? My God, the nerve! Richard, snapping out of his stupor, was consumed by a hot, white-hot rage. How dare she? How dare she embarrass him like this in front of everyone? He would not be beaten. He would put her back in her place. He grabbed his own paddle, his knuckles white. 600,000! He snarled, the word tearing from his throat. The room gasped again. A husband and wife, bidding against each other for the husband's mistress. It was a scandal unfolding in real time, more riveting than any opera. Asha didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the stage. She lifted her paddle again. Her voice was even calmer this time, if that were possible. $1 million. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a stunned, open-mouthed awe. $1 million. The number hung in the air, obscene and beautiful in its destructive power. People were no longer watching a bidding war. They were watching an execution. Richard felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't a desperate plea for attention. This was a calculated attack. Where was she getting this kind of money? Their joint accounts? He made a mental calculation. A bid this high would trigger alerts, raise questions from the board. It was reckless. It was insane. He had to end this. 1.5 million, he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He was sweating now, his tailored tuxedo suddenly feeling tight and suffocating. Issy looked horrified. The moment that was meant to be her coronation had become a grotesque spectacle of a crumbling marriage. The prize was no longer a dance with her. The prize was the total humiliation of the other. The spotlight was now swinging between Richard and Asha, the two epicenters of the earthquake that was tearing the gala apart. Asha Sterling lifted her paddle one final time. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke with the quiet finality of a judge passing a sentence. $5 million. The words $5 million fell into the grand ballroom like a physical object, heavy and unbreakable. It sucked all the air, all the sound, all the petty gossip out of the room. There was only a profound, collective intake of breath. The number was nonsensical, mythical. It was more than the entire auction had hoped to raise in a single night. It was a sum so vast, so utterly disproportionate to the prize, that it ceased to be about the prize at all. It was a statement of power so absolute it bordered on violence. Richard Sterling stared at his wife, his mind a maelstrom of fury and confusion. $5 million. Where in God's name did she think that money was coming from? He was the rainmaker. He controlled the capital. He made a move to raise his paddle, a reflexive act of defiance. But his arm felt like lead. He couldn't. He couldn't bid $5.1 million, not because he didn't have it, but because he couldn't access it. Not that quickly. A sum that large wasn't just sitting in a checking account. It was tied up in securities, in market positions, in funds that required days to liquidate. To make a pledge that large would require an immediate, verifiable line of credit. His entire financial life, his reputation for liquidity, would be scrutinized. And in that scrutiny, things would be found. The shell corporation, the slush fund, the dozens of other fiscal indiscretions he had committed. In her one impossible bid, Asha had not just challenged his wallet, she had challenged his entire fraudulent foundation. She knew. Somehow, she knew everything, and she had built a beautiful, perfect, inescapable trap. His face, which had cycled through shock and rage, now settled on the ashen, hollow look of utter defeat. He slowly, mechanically, lowered his hand to the table. He was broken. In front of all his peers, his rivals, his board members. In front of his mistress. He had been publicly castrated by the one person in the world he had assumed was powerless. Issy Vance looked as if she had been slapped. The adoration in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. She wasn't a princess in a fairy tale anymore. She was the sordid, overpriced centerpiece of the most humiliating divorce in New York history. The $5 million wasn't for her. It was the price tag of Asha's revenge. Every eye in the room was on her, not with admiration, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was no longer a rising star. She was a cautionary tale. Simon, the auctioneer, stood on stage, momentarily speechless. He looked at Richard, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was done. Then Simon looked at Asha, who met his gaze with a calm, regal authority. She hadn't just placed a bid. She had seized control of the entire evening. Finding his voice, Simon turned to the breathless crowd. $5 million, he said, his voice imbued with the gravity of the moment. To Mrs. Asha Sterling. Going once. He paused. The silence was absolute. Going twice. He looked again at Richard, whose face was now a blank mask of ruin. Sold! Simon's voice boomed as he brought the mahogany gavel down with a sharp, resonant crack that echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. For $5 million to the magnificent Mrs. Asha Sterling. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Harrison Blackwood, the chairman of the board, stood up. He began to clap. Not the polite, rhythmic applause of a charity gala, but a slow, deliberate, appreciative clap. A few others, mostly the older, more established figures in the room, who valued dignity over spectacle, joined him. Soon, the entire room, minus Richard's table, was on its feet, giving Asha a standing ovation. They weren't applauding the money. They were applauding the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the act. They were applauding the dethroning of a man who had become too arrogant, and the rise of a woman nobody had ever truly seen before. Asha inclined her head slightly, a queen accepting the fealty of her court. She then stood, the crimson of her dress, a blazing fire in the center of the room. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't look at Issy. Her gaze was fixed forward, on the future she had just purchased. The first act of her revenge was complete. Now, for the master stroke. As the applause subsided, a nervous energy filled the ballroom. What now? The logistics of the situation were as unprecedented as the bid itself. Would Asha Sterling, the wronged wife, actually take the stage to claim her prize, a dance with her husband's mistress? The spectacle was too deliciously perverse to comprehend. Asha moved with a poise that defied the chaos she had created. She walked not towards her table, but directly towards the stage, her crimson gown flowing behind her. As she passed Richard's chair, he reached out, his hand grasping her arm. "Asha, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You've made us a laughingstock." Asha stopped. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Her expression was not angry, not hurt, but icily indifferent, as if she were looking at a stranger. "You are mistaken, Richard," she said, her voice low and precise. "You did this. I am simply closing the account." She pulled her arm free with a quiet, firm gesture that brooked no argument. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage and took the microphone from a stunned Simon. The ballroom fell silent once more, every guest leaning forward in anticipation. What could she possibly say? "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "Thank you all for your support of the Children's Oncology Network, a cause of profound importance." She paused, letting the formal words settle. "Tonight I made a rather significant purchase," she continued, a faint, wry smile touching her lips. $5 million is a great deal of money. It is a testament to how deeply I believe in the power of a grand, public gesture. She let her eyes sweep the room, briefly meeting the horrified gaze of Issy, who stood frozen near the stage. A dance is a beautiful thing. It can be a symbol of love, of partnership, of a shared future. I believe such a symbol should be pure. It should be earned through dignity, respect, and kindness. She then turned to the side of the stage. "I understand we have a special guest with us tonight, not as a donor, but as a member of our community. Mr. Samuel Henderson? Is he here?" A wave of confusion went through the crowd. Who was Samuel Henderson? From the back of the ballroom, near the service entrance, a stooped, elderly man in a simple, well-worn suit began to shuffle forward, looking utterly bewildered. He was the head janitor for the Children's Hospital, a man who had worked there for over 40 years, beloved by staff and patients alike for his kindness and his habit of leaving little origami animals on the windowsills of the sickest children. He was being given a retirement dinner by the hospital board tonight. "Mr. Henderson," Asha said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "For 42 years, you have quietly served the children of this city. You have cleaned their rooms, comforted their parents, and brought smiles to faces in the darkest of times. Your contribution, though silent, is more valuable than any check that will be written here tonight." She turned back to the audience. "I am not a dancer, but I know a man of honor when I see one. Therefore, I would like to officially gift the prize I have just purchased. The first dance of the evening belongs not to the guest of honor, but to a true guest of honor. It belongs to Mr. Henderson. And I believe Miss Vance is waiting for him." It was a masterstroke of strategic brilliance. In a single move, she had transformed herself from a vengeful wife into a benevolent philanthropist. She had elevated a humble working man exposed the triviality of Issi's honorific, and completely rewritten the narrative of the evening. She had not only refused to be humiliated, but had seized the moral high ground so decisively that it was breathtaking. The room, after a moment of stunned processing, erupted. The applause was thunderous, genuine, and deafening. Mr. Henderson, his eyes filled with tears, was led to the stage. Issi, pale and trembling, had no choice but to accept the dance, her shimmering gown and diamond necklace a mockery next to the simple dignity of the old janitor. As the orchestra began to play a soft waltz, the sight of the young, disgraced mistress stiffly dancing with the weeping, honored janitor was a surreal tableau of justice. Asha didn't stay to watch. Her work here was done. As she descended the stage, a man in a dark suit, who had been waiting by the exit, approached Richard Sterling's table. In the midst of the applause for Mr. Henderson, the man leaned in and spoke a few quiet words to Richard, placing a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. Divorce papers. Served publicly, at the apex of his ruin. Asha walked calmly through the grand foyer of the plaza, past the stunned onlookers. The doorman rushed to open the door for her. The cold night air hit her face, feeling clean and new. A black car, one she had arranged herself, pulled up to the curb. Her assistant, Clara, was in the back seat, holding a coat for her. As Asha got in, she took one last look back at the gilded hotel. She had walked in as Mrs. Asha Sterling, the ghost in the machine. She was walking out as Asha, the architect of her own liberation. The car pulled away into the New York night, leaving the smouldering ashes of Richard Sterling's world behind her. The phoenix had not only risen, it had taken flight, and she was just getting started. The crack of the gavel had been the end of Richard's world, but the rustle of the legal papers being placed on his table was the sound of it being salted and burned. For a long moment, he simply stared at the thick manila envelope bearing the name of Maria Albright's law firm. It felt heavier than a tombstone. The noise of the ballroom, the thunderous applause for the janitor, the swelling music of the orchestra, the frantic whispers, faded into a dull, distant roar, the sound of blood rushing in his ears. He looked up and saw Harrison Blackwood staring at him from across the room. There was no sympathy in the old man's eyes, only a profound, glacial contempt. It was the look a king gives a court jester who has just committed treason. In that single glance, Richard understood that he hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost his board, his allies, his kingdom. Issi, her face a mess of mascara-streaked tears, finally returned from her macabre dance. "Richard, we have to leave," she pleaded, her voice a panicked rasp. "Everyone is staring. They're taking pictures." Richard looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The whiskey-colored eyes, the enchanting smile, it had all turned to poison. She wasn't a prize. She was the bait in the trap that had just snapped shut on his life. The $30,000 a month apartment, the St. Bart's trips, the necklace. He saw it all now as a ledger of his own stupidity. "Leave," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. "What?" "Richard, let's go together," she urged, reaching for his hand. He snatched his hand away as if she were diseased. "I said leave," he repeated, his voice rising to a low snarl that was more terrifying than a shout. "This is your fault. Get away from me." The cruelty of his words, so sudden and absolute, finally broke her. With a choked sob, she turned and fled, a shimmering silver ghost disappearing into a crowd that parted for her with morbid curiosity. She was no longer a person. She was a spectacle, an anecdote that would be told at dinner parties for years to come. Richard sat alone, the architect of a grand city now sitting in its ruins. He slowly got to his feet. The walk out of the ballroom was the longest of his life. No one met his eye. They looked away, at their plates, at their phones, anywhere but at the fallen Titan. It was a gauntlet of silent judgment, and it was infinitely worse than any shouted insult. Meanwhile, the black town car carrying Asher Sterling moved silently through the canyons of Manhattan. The adrenaline of the past hour was beginning to recede, leaving behind not exhaustion, but a sharp, crystalline focus. Clara sat beside her, holding a cashmere coat, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "The Phoenix Protocol is fully executed," Clara reported softly. "Your personal trusts are secured and shielded. All communications are being routed through the encrypted server." "Thank you, Clara." "For everything," Asher said, looking out at the blur of city lights. "Asher, the 5 million," Clara began, hesitating. "That was a significant move." "It was an investment, Clara," Asher corrected her gently. "An investment in clarity. Some things need to be brought into the light before they can be dealt with. And besides," she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, "it's only money." She had made a point to use funds from a premarital stock portfolio that had matured decades ago. It was her own money, untouchable by him, a detail she knew Maria Albright's team would make exquisite use of. The car wasn't heading towards the Park Avenue penthouse she had once called home. It was headed downtown, towards a stark, modern skyscraper in the financial district. "Aren't you going home?" Clara asked. "My work isn't finished," Asher replied. "Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 begins tonight." The car pulled into a private underground garage. When the doors opened, they were not in a residence, but in the hushed, fiercely air-conditioned lobby of Albright and Associates. Maria Albright was waiting for them, not in a gown, but in a severe grey pantsuit, looking as if she had just stepped out of a boardroom. "He's been served," Maria said, forgoing any greeting. "The media is already circling. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal's Society page has called my office twice. I expect the first online articles to be up within the hour." They walked into a conference room that was already a hive of activity. A team of 3 forensic accountants and 2 junior lawyers were hunched over laptops, their faces illuminated by the glow of spreadsheets and legal documents. This was Asher's true war room. "Report," Asher said, taking her seat at the head of the table. A young accountant looked up. "Mrs. Sterling, we've completed the preliminary audit of the Marketing and Development Fund Richard controlled. The malfeasance is worse than we thought. He's funneled over $7 million in the last 18 months into the IV Enterprises shell company. It wasn't just for the apartment. He paid for her car, her student loans, even a consulting fee to her out-of-work actor brother. It's blatant, systematic embezzlement." "Good," Asher said, her voice devoid of emotion. "That solidifies our position on the brand integrity clause." This was the core of her strategy, the loophole she had discovered months ago. The prenuptial agreement Richard had forced upon her was brutally one-sided, designed to protect his wealth. But in his arrogance, he had insisted on a mutual clause, Clause 11C, stating that any action by either party that brought the Sterling Innovations brand into public disrepute, scandal, or ridicule, resulting in material damage to the company's value, would be grounds for a punitive forfeiture of shared assets. He had intended it as a weapon to keep her in line. He never imagined it could be used against him. "Maria, has Harrison Blackwood called the emergency board meeting?" Asher asked. "He called me from the men's room at the gala 10 minutes after your bid," Maria confirmed. "It's scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. He's invoking Clause 7B of Richard's employment contract, gross misconduct, and dereliction of fiduciary duty." Asher nodded, a grim satisfaction on her face. The final piece, then. She looked at the team assembled before her. For the past 6 weeks, we have been preparing a full presentation. A new vision for Sterling Innovations. One based on stability, transparency, and sustainable growth. We have the audit proving Richard's fiscal recklessness, and we have a consortium of institutional investors led by Harrison who are ready to back a change in leadership. The gala, she explained, was never just about personal revenge. It was a corporate maneuver executed on a public stage. Her outrageous bid was a calculated signal to the market and to the board. It demonstrated that she had access to immense, independent liquidity. It showed she was decisive, fearless, and willing to do whatever it took to protect her interests, which were inextricably linked with the company's. While Richard was playing the part of the smitten billionaire, she was performing a hostile takeover of his reputation. "He thinks I'm coming after half his money," Asha said, her voice low and steady. "He is mistaken." She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the sleeping city, at the arteries of light and commerce. "I don't want his money. I don't want a settlement. I want my company back, the one I helped build from the ground up, before he decided I was just another one of his decorative assets." Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. A woman in a crimson gown, a queen in her war room, her expression forged in the fires of betrayal, and now cooled into something harder, stronger. "Monday morning," she declared, "we don't just file for divorce. We filed a motion for an immediate injunction, removing him as CEO pending the outcome of the corporate investigation. We present our vision. We initiate a proxy vote. We take control." Asha Sterling's story is a powerful testament that the best revenge isn't loud and chaotic. It's a cold, calculated masterpiece. She transformed her deepest betrayal into her greatest victory, proving that the silent partner can become the sole proprietor. From the ashes of a broken marriage, a true phoenix rose to reclaim her empire, not with tears, but with brilliant, ruthless strategy. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the entire game, leaving her enemies with nothing but the consequences of underestimating her. What did you think of her final move to take back the company? Was it pure justice or the ultimate corporate takeover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of strength and epic revenge, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible true-life dramas.